Hello and welcome to a brand new episode of the MEN1 Mosaic podcast. Today I have with me Tori, who is an MEN1 patient based in Maine in the US. I am super excited and I've asked her on to come and share about her story with MEN1, which I find super interesting, super inspiring, very moving as well, and essentially to give us her perspective on what it is to be an MEN1 patient, what that means for her, and what it is she wants to put out there for other people to hear. So welcome, Tori. It's super cool to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to jump straight in with my first question, which is what I ask all of my guests. What is your kind of your nutshell story with MEN1 and also your health generally, your wider health too?
Yeah, so I actually have a very involved MEN history. My family actually goes back about known 5 generations with MEN. We were one of the first families to be diagnosed with it. And we're in some of the early research here in the US. Um, so my great grandmother, my grandfather, my father, me, my children, well, one of my children, um, are all positive for MEN. And so there is quite like growing up my whole life. I knew it was a possibility, but I wasn't tested. Um, when I was born, my dad was in his 30s and going through some of his first surgeries for parathyroid and pancreas removal. So it's always been in my life. It's always just been a known possibility. My dad was pretty hands off about his treatment. And so I just kind of grew up thinking this was a possibility, but not a big deal. Like, we know what to expect, we know how to deal with it. Good to go. How wrong was I? So when I was 19, I ended up in the hospital with kidney stones for the first time. I was in Texas at the time for college and ended up at MD Anderson, and they immediately said, with your family history, um, MEN testing, parathyroid surgery. And so that got me on the track immediately. Since then, I've been diagnosed with all 3 Ps. I have pituitary, parathyroid, and pancreas, as well as adrenal involvement. And my sister and I talk about this all the time, how it's such a double-edged sword to have so much family with it, because we do have a great support system and people who understand what we're going through, like, which is something a lot of people don't have. But it also just intensifies the difficulty because it's constantly somebody's results coming back and new things popping up, and what are you dealing with and what are you seeing and how is that related. And so it can be exhausting at times, but is also good that I have close support that truly understands.
That's super interesting. Your the depth of your history. I think I don't know if I have met an MEN1 patient yet who can tell me that they are aware of 5 generations of their family with
Yeah,
MEN1, and
yeah.
that's pretty phenomenal. And something you said that was really interesting in terms of family. Your father had a kind of hands off approach to MEN1, and that maybe gave you the impression that okay, we've got this thing, we're aware of it, but it's not going to be a big deal. And definitely I think I relate with that massively. In terms of the experience you had then, with your father's relationship with his health, and then how you started managing yours, what's been the kind of the progression of that, say, as you found out that your one of your kids had MEN1? Would you say that you've wanted to kind of mimic how your father approached it, or you've had to take a very different route?
So that has definitely changed over the years. Um, my dad really did ignore things for a long time. There was a period of probably 20 years where he never even saw a doctor, and it caught up with him. And so I took the approach for myself to be very aggressive. Once I found out, I immediately was regular blood work, regular scans. As soon as something came up on a scan, it was very much, okay, how are we treating this? What are we doing? What is the most aggressive approach that I can take for this? Medication, surgery, what I want on top of it, especially when it comes to my pancreas. I was very much wanting to be aggressive. I've had several doctors tell me, so I'm on MEN1 injections and have been for 7 years. And I've had a few specialists tell me that it's not necessary, that I'm not progressed far enough to need it, and we should watch and wait. However, I've been completely stable for 7 years. And so I am confident in that treatment that it will prolong my disease progression and slow down, because I don't have any metastasis yet. And that's my goal, is to stay there. However, it also gets pretty exhausting staying up with all of the things, especially when every couple of years there's new tumors and new things that I have to do to stay on top of. So I've had both adrenals removed, and that has added a big complexity to my medical care, and it can get exhausting. And when I look at my son and think this is the rest of his life, the longer I can wait for that to happen for him, the better. I want him to be aware. I want him to be involved. I want him to stay on top of it and not completely ignore it for 20 years. But I also don't want it to control its life like I feel it has for me. So I am trying to learn a balance between being involved and proactive versus not being super aggressive and kind of obsessive about it. I want my son to understand what possibilities there are for his future, but to not stress so much about all of the testing. We have been a little bit delayed in some of his testing just because even if something does come up, it's not something I'm necessarily going to treat right away. And if it's not something I'm going to treat right away, there's no point in putting him through the testing. So recommendation of annual MRIs, we usually stretch out to 3 to 5 years. 3-year MRIs, we usually stretch out to 5 to 7 years, unless he has symptoms. I'm also very well aware of symptoms and things to pay attention to. And because I can kind of do that for him, I'm trying to take some of the pressure off of him. So I do think that everybody has a different threshold, and finding that balance that is good for you and your life is delicate, but what each person needs to do to be able to still live their life but stay on top of it.
That's such a beautiful way of putting it. Exactly, being, as you said before, proactive and on top of things, but not necessarily letting it take over your life or becoming obsessed, I think was the word you used. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because one of the challenges that gets brought to me and that I see around, I guess, the patient forums and the communities is, struggling to find that balance between being aggressive in one's healthcare versus proactive, because they're not actually the same thing. There's a very different energy behind those.
Absolutely.
What's your experience of both of those? What did aggressive feel like to you, if you've had experience of that versus being proactive and engaged and on top of things?
So when I say like aggressive in my treatment, it's more like, okay, so specifically with my pancreas, when tumors were found, I wanted surgery. I wanted them out. I wanted to be aggressive in taking them out. In talking to the doctors, they weren't keen on that. And talking about the pros and cons, I finally agreed, but I still wasn't willing to just watch and wait. I wanted something. And I was lucky that my oncologist here supported starting lanreotide. So when I say aggressive, that's what I mean, is just not watching and waiting for something to happen and treating it after the fact, but actually taking charge and doing the treatment ahead of time, or as soon as possible, maybe not ahead of time, but as soon as it comes up, versus waiting and watching, which they do a lot with pancreas, at least here in the US. Whereas proactive is more, to me, just making sure you're staying on top of your scans, getting your blood work when new symptoms coming up, not ignoring and waiting for them to just go away. And both of those things can be done without becoming obsessive about it. But I found it's easy to get lost in that and end up forgetting that you have this for the rest of your life, and that sometimes that pace can't continue.
That's again such a valid point. And you said the word earlier, exhaustion. And I love this word. Well, do I love the word? I love talking about exhaustion because it falls under a really interesting topic for me, which is, can we call exhaustion officially a symptom of MEN1? I mean, it's one of those things where, like, yeah, we're all exhausted. Everyone's exhausted because it's the nature of human condition. Is we get exhausted by the things we've got to deal with in life. And then I've taken exhaustion to a consultant before and said, like, I'm exhausted. And he, in the most amazing way, and I'm very lucky with my team, managed to help me work out where's the exhaustion coming from. In your
Oh my,
experience,
that's amazing.
I mean, it's a really valuable thing to be able to do. And I wondered, in your case, are you able to identify exhaustion that you would say is a physical symptom of this condition versus exhaustion, which is essentially, it's the mental, the emotional toll that this condition takes on you?
I definitely would say I experience both. I do identify those as two different things. There is, to me, fatigue is not a great enough word to describe it. I think exhaustion is much better, because fatigue sounds like something you can rest and recover from, and that's not the case. There is the physical exhaustion where just getting up and going through the day is difficult. You feel like you're walking through mud. But then I love that you differentiate the two between the mental and the emotional toll, because just having it constantly hanging over you, I don't think that chronic illness, the mental aspects of it are talked about enough. I don't think that medically it's recognized how emotionally taxing it is having it hanging over you. Especially when it comes, so a lot of times when you talk about the pancreas, you're in cancer support groups because it can metastasize. But most cancers are treated and then you're over it, or else you don't make it past it. And it's a short-term situation, which for the few years you're dealing with it is exhausting. And yes, I do understand that even once you are in remission of another cancer, it's still always in the back of your head. I do recognize that, and I do not want to minimize the feeling that those people have. I'm not saying that it's easier by any means, but sometimes just thinking about the fact that that will never be a possibility for me. Like, it's never just going to be like, okay, I reached the 5 years and now I can wait a couple years for a scan, or I don't have to worry about this unless there's a recurrence and things like that. Sometimes I can overwhelm myself with that, and I don't like to play the for me, or the like, oh, they have it worse or I have it worse type of thing, because everybody's own experience is theirs, and it doesn't matter what others are in order to say that. It's the fact that you are in that and dealing with that. So, and other chronic diseases, even that aren't cancer, I don't think get that acknowledgement that you are never going to have a break from this. And I personally just I talk to my counselors about it a lot. Like, how do I accept this? Because there's nothing I can change about it as much as I want to.
That's a really powerful point that you've just made, and thank you for sharing that. Um, I wasn't going to ask this question actually, but now you've mentioned it, I feel kind of inspired. You talked about, counselors, and it made me think about something you said earlier, which is support and having amazing support. And it sounds like the stage at which you are now in your MEN1 journey, your health journey, you have people around you, you have structures in place to help you manage this thing. And I'm sure that's not just come, like that. I'm also sure it's not just come, by accident. I imagine you have put steps in place to make that work for yourself, and you have connected with the right people, and you have done some work basically. What
Yes.
how have you done that? How is that the case for there's so many people who just say like they're at their wits end because they can't find, the support they need.
So I am unlucky enough to have a lot of family. Also, the internet is an amazing resource that, you know, my dad didn't have. Um, Patient support groups have been fabulous for me. I've really learned a lot. I know that they can get a bad rap sometimes because it's easy to go down a rabbit hole. And it's, they're not medical. It's just, and there is misinformation, but it's people that are also going through it. It's a place to vent. It's a place to have a community. It's a place to reach out to people. There's not a single support group that I'm in that if somebody reached out and said, I'm struggling today, I just need a person, they wouldn't have multiple people respond and say, I'm here for you, private message me, we got you. And I think that that is something so unique to this time period right now, where those resources weren't available previously. Um, there I'm also learning about different organizations around that have counseling services and patient support groups and patient outreach. And in my state specifically, there is an actor whose mother had cancer and started a cancer support group. It's called the Dempsey Center. And they do amazing things. They have zero medical treatments. It like not they don't do cancer treatments, but anybody going through cancer can go there for additive therapies, which I am just really loving. And anybody that can find space in their life to do this, I think is so helpful. They have yoga classes and nutrition classes, and they offer massages and different things like that that treat the mental side of the exhaustion. And so I I think the Dempsey Center a lot was what opened up my eyes to the fact that it's not just the medical treatments and the medical appointments that are going to help us get through it, but the fact that we need to treat our bodies and our minds to help us have the strength to get through all of the things that we go through.
It's amazing. I couldn't agree more personally. And I'm gonna pop in the notes later a link for that center you've just mentioned, because I
Okay.
think when people are able to share what's helped them, it is so powerful, because it might be the one thing that someone either is desperately looking for or they just didn't know they needed. So thank you very much
Yeah.
for mentioning.
And while the Dempsey Center is very local, it's just a couple of centers in Maine. They do actually, I just found out yesterday that they're offering a lot of um, online services. I haven't looked in yet to see if you have to be in Maine or how to get connected with that, but just knowing that that place exists might help people look for that type of availability in their own community. Because I do think that they're out there more than people realize.
Absolutely. Sometimes you don't find something until you start looking for it.
Exactly.
Uh, Tori, I could honestly speak to you all day. This has been such a fantastic episode so far. I am honestly inspired, and I feel like you've given so many nuggets of
Mm.
wisdom that hopefully people will be able to take forward and find some solace in, or just feel empowered by, in terms of learning of your approach. I have one final
I,
question before we go, and I leave this
yeah.
with all of my guests. If there is one piece of advice or something you could say to a past version of yourself at any point in your MEN1 journey, based on what you know now and what you've learned, what would it be?
Um, I think in the early days, learning some of that balance between that completely aggressive a treatment isn't necessarily always the answer. Excuse me. Sometimes it can cause more issues than help. And so finding that balance between being proactive and not ignoring doesn't necessarily mean being super aggressive in starting the treatments. And I wish I could have found that balance a little bit sooner.
What an amazing note to end on. And I wish my past self could hear you saying that.
And hopefully somebody early in their journey can learn it too. You know, I've seen people in groups give recommendations about physicians, and I think it really is a personality thing. And I think some of it has to do with how aggressive you want to be with your treatment. Some people are more reserved and they don't want to say that this is cancer, and they don't want to go in there and do things. They want to watch and wait. And you need to find a doctor that is the same level with you. Whereas other people, when they're told watch and wait, absolutely just come undone. And if your doctor isn't going to be aggressive for you and that's what you need, don't be afraid to get a second or third or fourth or fifth opinion, to find a doctor that meshes with you and has that same type of treatment goal.
You've read my mind. I've just literally been writing exactly the same thing for an email today, and yeah, I couldn't
Yeah,
have put it better myself. Tori, thank you
awesome.
so much for your time, your wisdom, your generosity, and I'm really excited that you're in the community, and I hope at some point that we can have you back on, and that you can share.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really honored, and continue doing the work that you do. I I it's I would love to do this, and I just haven't found the space, and so I'd love to see others doing it. It makes me really happy because it's definitely something that's needed for people. And so thank you for all of the time and work that you put in for all of us out here.
Thank you so much, Tori.